Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we are going to explore the hidden architecture of the late bloomer. We're looking at a deeply misunderstood journey, one that completely defies the typical kind of relentless societal timelines we are all pressured to follow. If you've ever felt totally out of sync with the rush to achieve early, or maybe if you know someone who just seems to be taking the long way around, well, what we are about to uncover is going to fundamentally change how you see success, time, and the invisible work of building a life.
So have you ever felt like you're still stuck in the building phase? Well, it seems like literally everyone else around you has already arrived. There is this very specific, incredibly silent ache experienced by a lot of men in their 30s and 40s. Maybe you know this man, or hey, maybe you are him. Look, he's not broke, he's not falling apart, right? But he watches the guys he went to school with post online about their brand new companies, their huge, shiny titles, their next big house. And when he sees that, something just tightens in his chest. It isn't exactly jealousy. No, it's quieter than that. It's this heavy, lingering question. What in the world did they figure out that I didn't? He doesn't say it out loud. He just drives home, does what needs to be done, and pushes that feeling right back down.
But underneath all of that, there is one thought. One thought that just keeps coming back. I'm not behind. I'm just not finished yet. And listen, I want to validate that deeply for you right now. Because this unspoken thought, it isn't just some feel-good coping mechanism. According to the actual psychology of how men develop over time, this thought is a highly accurate reflection of reality. The men who take the absolute longest to arrive are very, very often the exact ones who build something that simply doesn't fall apart.
Okay, let's dive into this. When psychologists map out long-term development, they uncover what we can essentially call the architect's journey. And it reveals this incredibly consistent, honestly surprising pattern. A lot of men do not hit their highest sense of purpose or competence in their 20s or 30s. No way. Instead, they hit it in their 40s and 50s. The 20s don't look like some tidy, organized preparation. They look like the absolute hell of confusion. Then the 30s? That's a massive gap of pressure. It's only later on that we see the quiet arrival of true purpose. Basically, the peak of their competence hits way, way later than society expects.
Now, this brings us to a massive disconnect between how this journey looks to other people and what is actually happening. Because from the outside, the late bloomer's path looks like aimless wandering. It looks like quitting jobs, maybe even laziness or passivity. Observers look at it and think absolutely nothing is happening. But from the inside, oh man, it feels like everything is happening all at once. It is an intense, completely invisible period of self-construction. These guys are relentlessly laying structural groundwork. They're putting one more brick in the foundation, even when they can't quite see what the final building is going to look like yet. Let's look at why this actually happens. It really comes down to having a highly sensitive internal compass. You see the guy who stays in a job for 3 years, a job literally everyone says is perfect for him, and then he just quits for something that pays less, completely baffling his family. Well, this hesitation isn't a lack of ambition. Actually, scratch that, it isn't a fear of success or some weird psychological block that needs clearing either. It's structural. His internal compass is so sensitive that it simply refuses to lock onto an untrue path. It literally feels physically impossible for him to commit his whole weight to a foundation that feels false, even when everyone around him is screaming at him to just settle down.
The famous psychologist Carl Jung actually understood the hidden danger of forcing early success. He believed that pushing certain men into a rigid identity too early doesn't produce actual, lasting success. It produces a fracture. The Jungian fracture happens when a life looks completely, 100% right from the outside, but is quietly, tragically falling apart from the inside. This is exactly why you see men at 45 or 50 who are just quietly devastated by everything they've built, suddenly realizing they don't actually want any of it.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the fundamental difference between these two paths comes down to when the price is paid. The early achiever locks into an identity super fast. They look incredibly successful early on, sure, but they risk that devastating midlife fracture at 45. The late builder, on the other hand, pays a very different price, and they pay their toll completely up front. Let's be real, being unable to lock onto a path isn't some magical gift in your 20s. It's pure hell. But because they endure that upfront cost, they end up building an unshakable stability for their later years.
But here's the catch. Getting to that rock-solid stability requires living in what is known as the gap. This is the agonizing, frustrating space between what you clearly sense you're capable of and what you have actually built in the real world so far. And let me tell you,
It is one of the loneliest places a human being can possibly live. You know what your potential is. You can practically feel it buzzing inside you, but you have absolutely no answer for why you can't execute it yet. It's almost impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't sat in that exact heavy isolation.
However, what's a lot harder to see from the outside is that this gap, it isn't just empty waiting room space. It is a crucible. As the saying goes, pressure over enough time changes the material. Psychologists who study resilience under long-term difficulty find that men who spend more time failing and wandering don't just passively endure it. The pressure fundamentally alters their psychological makeup. They are literally being forged.
And because of that intense pressure, enduring failure grants these men some incredible, invisible advantages. They become intimately familiar with failure, learning to sit in discomfort way longer than most normal people can tolerate. They completely stop trusting the surface of things. So think about it. While other men in their 20s were just learning how to win on the surface, the late builder was in the trenches learning the deep, complex mechanics underneath winning. They learned true patience, incredibly sharp risk assessment, and how to read situations at a level most folks simply can't reach. This difference, it's completely invisible at 30, but it becomes absolutely decisive by the time they hit 50.
So the crucial point is, there is a fatal trap here, one that can utterly destroy all of this invisible progress, and that trap is resentment. Some men go through the delay, the aimless wandering, the years that look like absolutely nothing, and they arrive carrying a wound that poisons the whole foundation. They mistakenly measure themselves against timelines that were literally never built for them. They call their crucial building years wasted time, and they become bitter in this quiet way that hardens into a permanent, low-grade resentment. That right there is the one thing that can absolutely kill a late emergence.
To avoid that trap, the late bloomer has to make a vital, highly practical shift. And no, it's not about toxic positivity or some fluffy therapeutic forgiveness ritual. It's about structural accuracy. Step 1, you absolutely have to stop carrying the past as evidence of what is wrong with you. Step 2, you must start reading it as a record of how you were built. The difference between a man who is bitter at 60 and a man who finally feels completely like himself isn't luck or raw talent. It is entirely the story he decides to tell about what the delay was actually for.
And this brilliantly illustrates how this reframing actually looks in practice. Think about those failed paths. They weren't a waste of time. They cleared the ground. Those brutal years of endurance, they stress tested the foundation so it absolutely won't crack later. And those unfitting jobs that you quit, that is absolute, undeniable proof of a working internal compass, even when following it was incredibly inconvenient at the time. This reframe isn't making excuses, it's just pure accuracy.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the ultimate payoff in the second half of life, the quiet arrival. When you finally reframe the past, something specific and amazing happens to these men. The desperate urgency to prove something, to match everyone else's cookie-cutter timeline, it just simply disappears. The ambition is definitely still there, maybe even sharper than ever, but the anxiety goes completely quiet. In its place, a clean, precise deliberateness takes over. Decisions that used to take months of internal warfare suddenly become incredibly crystal clear.
This creates a really fascinating contrast in the types of confidence you see. Early achievers often rely on what we can call a brittle certainty. It's a performed confidence. It looks great on paper, but it can easily snap under real pressure. The late builder, though, he possesses a quiet consistency. He is settled. He's already done the grueling internal work that most people just defer until a midlife crisis forces it on them. He doesn't need to perform stability because he spent years actually building it. When the pressure comes, and trust me, it always comes, he doesn't lose the thread of who he is.
Ultimately, the man who comes out the other side of this long delay, who didn't fake his way through it, who didn't trade his actual authentic self just for the temporary relief of fitting in somewhere, he is built differently. Not necessarily better, not more special, but built on ground that will actually hold. The years that looked like nothing were not nothing. They were expensive, yeah. They were lonely, for sure. And there was absolutely no shortcut. But they were the necessary, non-negotiable cost to ensure the final structure will never ever collapse.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound question. The issue isn't whether you are behind. The question is, are you building something real, or are you building something that will feel completely hollow the very moment you arrive? Sadly, most men never find out the difference. If you are in the middle of the delay right now, trust your timeline. Trust the unseen construction. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep building, and I'll catch you next time.